Welcome to this video. Have you ever wondered how the Tower of Babel, a story from the dawn of humanity, connects to the end times and the coming of the Antichrist? In the Tower of Babel, the origin of rebellion and the coming of the Antichrist, we'll explore the roots of human rebellion against God, beginning with Babel, and trace its influence through to biblical prophecies about the end of days. This story holds profound insights into the nature of pride, unity in defiance, and the consequences of turning away from God. In this video, we'll uncover how the events of Babel reveal a pattern that re-emerges in prophecies about the Antichrist and the world's ultimate rejection of God's authority. By understanding Babel, you'll gain a clearer perspective on the spiritual battle that's still unfolding today, and how to stand firm against the deceptions of our time. These lessons are not only relevant but essential for strengthening your faith in a world increasingly at odds with divine truth. Are you ready to connect the ancient with the future and uncover the spiritual implications of humanity's oldest rebellion? How can this knowledge prepare you for what's to come? Join us as we delve into the hidden meanings of Babel and the prophetic messages it holds for today's believers. Let's begin this journey together. After the flood, humanity began to grow and spread, but instead of scattering across the earth as God had commanded, they chose to settle together in one place. This story unfolds in a time when people still spoke a single language, and they felt a strong unity that encouraged them to undertake a major project, the construction of a city with a towering structure that would reach the heavens. The people's decision to build a massive tower wasn't simply a construction project, it was a statement. They wanted to make a name for themselves, Genesis 11 verse 4, expressing a desire for independence and recognition that would rival God's authority. Rather than relying on God, they sought self-sufficiency and fame, which they believed could be achieved through their impressive unity and effort. In their unity, they believed they could accomplish anything, even reaching the heights of heaven itself. The Tower of Babel symbolized human ambition at its peak, with people choosing to elevate themselves instead of honoring and obeying God's command to fill the earth. They had forgotten the lessons from the flood and now sought power and permanence through their own strength and ambition. However, God saw their project and understood the deeper implications of their unified rebellion. He knew that unchecked, their unity in pride and rebellion would lead them further from His purpose and closer to self-destruction. To prevent this, God chose to intervene in a unique way that would disrupt their plans without harming them directly. God's intervention came through a sudden confusion of their language, making it impossible for them to communicate with one another. As they tried to work, they could no longer understand each other, which halted the construction of the tower and scattered the people across the earth. This division in language effectively ended their unified rebellion and compelled them to obey God's original command to spread across the world. The story of Babel is significant because it marks a turning point in humanity's relationship with God, showing the dangers of pride and the power of unity when misused. It also sets the stage for the diversity of languages and cultures we see today, reminding us that God values humility and obedience over human ambition and pride. The Tower of Babel stands as a powerful symbol of human pride and disobedience. By attempting to build a tower that would reach the heavens, humanity sought to elevate itself to a position that rivaled God's power and authority. This act directly contradicted God's command to fill the earth, as they chose to gather in one place instead, clinging to unity rather than embracing God's plan of spreading across the world. Their desire for greatness and self-sufficiency revealed a level of pride that challenged God's authority. Building the tower was also a statement of rejection against God's plan. Rather than trusting in His wisdom, the people of Babel aimed to establish their own path and destiny. In building a tower to make a name for themselves, they symbolized humanity's desire to control their spiritual path, detached from the guidance and protection of God. This act was a pursuit of spiritual independence, reflecting a mentality of "we know best," rather than submitting to God's greater understanding. The rebellion at Babel set a precedent for humanity's continuous struggle with pride and self-reliance, themes that appear repeatedly throughout history. Babel became the first significant instance of organized defiance against God, showing how the human heart can lean towards autonomy instead of obedience. This act of defiance has echoes in various stories of rebellion throughout the Bible and continues to symbolize the human tendency to resist divine authority. Spiritually, the story of Babel reveals the consequences of a heart set on rebellion. By prioritizing self and seeking power outside of God's will, the people of Babel distanced themselves from the protection and provision that only God can offer. Their ambition and pride led not to glory, but to division and scattering, illustrating the dangers of self-centered goals that conflict with God's purpose. This story also shows how God addresses rebellion not only with correction but with redirection. Instead of punishing the people harshly, he scattered them across the earth, giving them an opportunity to fulfill his original command. While the people's intentions were misguided, God's response allowed them to start anew, highlighting his mercy even in moments of judgment. The Tower of Babel, therefore, serves as a warning about the power of pride and the importance of aligning our ambitions with God's will. It teaches us that while unity and ambition are not inherently wrong, they become dangerous when used to defy God's authority. The story reminds us of the consequences of turning away from divine guidance, and how humanity's desire for independence often leads to spiritual separation from the one who seeks to guide and protect us. Many scholars draw a prophetic connection between the story of Babel and the future rise of the Antichrist, a figure in biblical prophecy who will unite the world in rebellion against God. Just as the people of Babel came together with a common purpose that opposed God's plan, the Antichrist is prophesied to gather nations and people under a global system that ultimately rejects God's authority. This spirit of rebellion is seen as a recurring theme throughout history, resurfacing in powerful leaders and systems that attempt to replace divine truth with human control. In the story of Babel, the people united to create a tower and city that symbolized human greatness and independence from God. This unity, though powerful, was misguided. Similarly, the Antichrist is believed to seek a global unity, but one that leads humanity away from God and toward a centralized system of control. In the book of Revelation, the Antichrist's rule is described as a time when he will hold significant power over nations, religions, and even economic systems, creating a new Babel where humanity is unified in defiance of God. This global control is not seen as positive in the Bible. Rather, it represents the ultimate attempt of human pride and rebellion to establish a kingdom without God. The Antichrist's rule is considered the climax of humanity's history of rebellion, a final stand against divine authority. Like the people at Babel, the Antichrist will lead many to believe that human achievement and unity can replace the need for God, fueling a pride that echoes the same defiance as Babel. The Bible describes the Antichrist as a charismatic, persuasive leader who will deceive many into following him, making him a representation of humanity's desire to make a name for itself apart from God. This deception parallels Babel's prideful ambition, as both the tower builders and followers of the Antichrist seek independence from divine will. This period, however, is prophesied to end in a divine intervention, much like the scattering at Babel, where God steps in to set things right. The rebellion of Babel serves as a foreshadowing of this ultimate rebellion led by the Antichrist. The pattern of humanity striving for control and unity outside of God's plan, only to be met with divine judgment, is seen as a recurring theme throughout the Bible. Babel was a warning, showing that no matter how powerful human efforts become, they cannot surpass God's authority and plan. In this light, Babel is not just an ancient story but a reminder of what happens when human ambition and pride attempt to challenge God's rule. The prophecy of the Antichrist reflects a final attempt to establish a kingdom of Babel on a global scale, a rebellion that will ultimately fail. The story warns us that while human unity and progress have potential, they can become destructive when they oppose God's purposes, leading to consequences that impact all of humanity. The story of Babel teaches a valuable lesson about the importance of humility and submission to God's will. At its core, Babel is a reminder that pride and self-exaltation can lead us away from God, creating a false sense of independence. By seeking to make a name for themselves, the people of Babel ignored God's instructions and tried to establish their own way, which ultimately led to division. This story encourages us to remain humble and recognize that true greatness comes from aligning ourselves with God's purpose. Babel also serves as a warning against spiritual rebellion. By trying to create a life and society without God, the people of Babel demonstrated how human efforts without divine guidance can ultimately bring harm rather than fulfillment. This rebellion is echoed throughout history and reminds us of the dangers of rejecting God's authority in pursuit of our own plans. The consequences at Babel show that any rebellion against God, whether on a personal or societal level, can lead to separation and loss of unity. As we look to the future, the lessons of Babel can help us remain grounded in faith. In a world that increasingly challenges and questions divine authority, this story calls us to stay close to God's teachings and resist the temptation to rely solely on human wisdom. Babel encourages us to live with a spirit of obedience and faith, trusting in God's plan even when the world promotes independence from Him. Maintaining this perspective helps us avoid the pitfalls of self-sufficiency and stay connected to God's guidance. The story also reminds us that unity without God can be dangerous. While working together can be powerful, true unity needs to be centered on God's truth and love. The people of Babel used their unity for self-serving purposes, leading to divine intervention. In contrast, unity grounded in faith and obedience to God brings harmony and purpose. This lesson is essential as we consider how to foster unity in our communities and relationships. Reflecting on Babel can inspire us to examine our own intentions and ambitions. Are we building towers in our lives that seek recognition apart from God? Are we pursuing goals that elevate ourselves instead of honoring Him? By checking our motives and ensuring that God is at the center of our aspirations, we can avoid the trap of pride and stay connected to His purpose for us. The story of Babel calls us to a life of faith, humility, and obedience. It serves as both a warning and an encouragement, warning us against the dangers of pride and self-reliance, while encouraging us to live in alignment with God's will. In doing so, we can avoid the mistakes of Babel and walk a path that brings us closer to God and to His eternal plan for humanity. To conclude, let's recap the main points we've discussed in this video. We explored the story of Babel, its significance as a symbol of human pride and rebellion, and how it connects to prophetic themes, including the foreshadowing of the Antichrist. Through Babel, we see how humanity's desire for independence from God led to division and the scattering of nations, a pattern that repeats throughout history. Understanding Babel is essential not only as a historical event but as a powerful symbol of pride that continues to resonate today. It serves as a reminder of the consequences when humanity chooses self-exaltation over humility and unity without God. This story calls us to examine our own ambitions, encouraging us to remain humble and aligned with God's will. Babel also offers a prophetic perspective, giving us a glimpse into future events described in the Bible. Just as humanity attempted to build a kingdom without God in Babel, the Antichrist will one day attempt to unite the world in rebellion against divine authority. Babel warns us of the dangers of rejecting God's guidance, making it a story with enduring relevance. As we reflect on Babel, let it inspire us to live with humility, faith, and obedience. Let's remember that true unity and purpose come only through alignment with God's will. The story of Babel challenges us to keep God at the center of our lives and decisions, guarding against pride and self-centered ambitions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing your own thoughts in the comments. How does the story of Babel resonate with you, and what insights does it offer for us today? Your reflections and ideas are always appreciated.